being on camera. But the very last day I was in London, she called me, and we met for lunch, and we went to a nearby park, and I did the interviews with her. At that time, Chris's parents, they just had a relative that had died, and his brother was, I had not given me their phone number, and I had to wait nearly a year before I was able to connect with them, and they learned a lot about me. Everyone had met me now, his brother and Jeannie's still like a member of the family, and so I flew back to England and spent nearly a week with Chris's parents. And, and when you're doing stuff like that, like with his parents, I was trying to find some dark, secret, hidden thing. I was just really trying to get a sense of what his family had been, what he was like when he was growing up. And, I could really see that even at a young age, at 15, 16 years old, he was a judo champ already. He was already went to a great dojo. He and his brother were national champs. His brother ended up getting 2 silver medals. But Chris had this rock concert type thing going too. He actually produced a rock concert when he was about 18 years old, and fairly good sized one. And so he was he had the showmanship combined with a judo, and that in many ways equals becoming a professional wrestler. And he took to it rapidly. And one of the fighters, a guy named Big Daddy, who was, his coach, basically helped him transition from judo to wrestling. I don't know if he fully ever completed that. He was incredible with judo in the ring, and Chris' career took off very rapidly. And he announced to his family one day he got hired at a venue in Los Angeles, and he had met Jeannie. They got married, and they took off to Los Angeles, and his career just literally skyrocketed from that point on. And the late 80s, drugs had really intensely invaded wrestling, and the schedule that the guys had, it was horrific. They fought 7 to 8 times a week. They fought every day. There were really no days off, and they would hit the plane, get off, go to a gym, go back to the hotel, do the show, and then they would party. And Chris partied just as intense as he wrestled. It was 200%. And after about 15 years, it really started taking a toll on him, like it did the Ram and the Mickey Rourke film, and it was, and wrestling had changed drastically. The reason our show went downhill was extremely simple. Fritz believed the wrestling's on one side of the coin and television's on the other side of the coin. And it was the old school, the way things were. And Gary Hart just had a book that came out. It's probably the best book ever written on wrestling, and it's tremendous. And one of the things I learned in his book was, and Gary was one of my best friends, and he had never really told me this, is when I started doing the show. At that point, wrestling was only broadcast in local venues. And my idea was to syndicate it across the country, actually around the world. We had 23 countries, 82 cities. It was a simple idea. We just do it first class. We do it with 6 cameras, and previously it had been done with 2, 1 camera without even a cameraman. And so it was a simple concept, and we executed like we would. We did the preseason Cowboy games, for instance, and Southwest Conference football, and we knew what we were doing. And so it took off really well. The problem is what I learned from Gary is Fritz had he was afraid of me learning the secrets of wrestling and all the behind the scenes. And when Gary Hart and I worked together, we worked one-on-one and very creatively, and it was very collaborative. and we, really created good episodes. And I remember near the end, I did it for 4 years from the start, and then I left. But right at the last, I was concerned. I'd grown up in radio, and I was fairly knowledgeable on ratings and how to manipulate ratings. And our first fight, generally we had 3 to 4 bouts. The main event being the last one. And our first bout often was Fritz would put a throwaway fight. It was with has-been wrestler, someone who's not famous anymore, and it wouldn't be a real action-packed fight. And I felt, we should do some things. And one of them was, I suggested that there was a priest who was taking on all comers near Mexico City, about 100 miles outside of Mexico City. This is in 1984, and he was raising money for a orphanage that he ran. And Nacho Libre was based on this priest, in fact. This is back in the 80s when I was trying to do this. I wanted to go down there and shoot some of these fights in this horse corral that he was doing them in, and use those as a preliminary fights, and like maybe 6 to 8 shows down the road, I'll bring him to Dallas and do a big show with Von Erichs helping him to save the orphanage, that type of thing. Well, the mere fact that I was presenting that to Fritz made Fritz very angry. And Fritz was one of my best friends, so I didn't know a lot of what was going on, though. It made him very angry that someone on the television end would suggest something that would improve the ratings, and something that was his end. And so, we didn't do it. WCW, it was the same side of the coin. The TV and the wrestling were together. And Vince McMahon, it's TV and wrestling are together. That's what it wasn't. In my opinion, it wasn't so much the deaths of the Von Erichs, tragic deaths. It was, I think that did play a role, but I think it was the fact that there were these two sides of the coin, TV and wrestling, and they weren't together. To be successful, you have to be together. You have to be one team. And when Gary Hart and I worked at producing the show together, I think we really came up with outstanding episodes. And that's approximately the first 120 or so episodes. And then other people became involved. And Fritz fired Gary out of somewhere right in there. And there were a lot of complications. I sound like I'm being too critical of Fritz. I'm not trying to be. I have great respect for him, and probably the person of all people I've ever met in my life that I respect for is both Kevin Von Erich and Kevin Atkinson and Gary Hart. Losing Gary has been really rough on me this past year. I'm separated from my wife. Gary was, likely I'd say my best friend. And I didn't even believe he had died. I remember I called. Sometimes wrestlers would do this for publicity, spread the rumor they're dead. And I remember calling as apparently his sons were there. They were dying laughing. And it was a sad time, But I called and said, Gary, listen, I don't believe in a million years you're dead. Please pick up the phone. Please pick up the phone. And after time passed, a few more hours, I started realizing I couldn't believe it. Gary's dead. And the same thing was true with Chris. It was, impossible to believe that Chris was dead. He was someone who could, generally in the end, I don't care whether it be his drug addiction or whatever it might be, Chris was someone who would overcome, I believe, eventually would have overcome his problems. He had a tremendous heart. He had tremendous energy.
Man. Now, you have this best friend who, shot him in self-defense, and not only came on camera to talk about it, but even demonstrated how it all went down. Was that hard for him? Was it?
That was many days of shooting, and he was intoxicated, and he also was taking Xanax. He would take the Xanax bottle and drink the tablets. You know, he would like pull out one or two tablets. He would just